Their brain cannot produce on its own our survival chemicals, which are dopamine and serotonin. Right. They are the chemicals that drive all of our most base human instincts. Eat, drink, fight, flight, procreate. All are dopamine and serotonin behaviors. When an individual is deprived of opioids, when they engage in behavior that looks as though it is depraved criminality, what we are actually seeing is the symptomological display of the neurochemical brain injury that results from dopamine and serotonin shutdown.
Hi everyone, this is Dr. Christina Rahm, and I am here with Bryan Hubbard, and I've heard so many wonderful things about you and what you're doing and your advancements to really help people with PTSD and anxiety and everything else, and I just want to thank you for that. I know there aren't a lot of advancements. I used to be a psychologist, you may or may not know that, but there haven't been a lot of advancements for people with depression or PTSD or anxiety, so thank you for your advancements that you're making.
It is a true joy to be able to serve in this capacity. This was not a pathway that I anticipated or would ever believe that I would have the privilege to walk on, but I am just wonderfully blessed to be able to sit here and have a conversation with you for all the reasons that have brought us together.
Thank you so much. Tell me how you got into the Ibogaine and how you were able to figure out how you could help people, because I'd love to hear about your journey. Of course, I have read some about your journey, but I would love for our listeners, because they're international, to really hear about how you got into helping people in this area and how you were able to realize how significant it was.
Well, it is all going to begin with when I had my first memories as a child.
Okay.
My parents were very young when they married. They married within the context of some very difficult socioeconomic circumstances. They came up in one of Virginia's coal mining counties, one of the poorest in the country. I think they saw each other as one another's escape ticket out.
Yeah.
And they left home early and married early. And by the time I came along, as sometimes will happen, they were not getting along very well. And I remember a lot of acrimony and chaos in my home. I was very blessed to have two sets of grandparents who took very high interest in me and my future. I had two grandfathers who were grade school educated coal miners who had had tremendously difficult lives, the sorts of lives that oftentimes would make individuals hard and bitter toward the world. But rather than being hard and bitter, these gentlemen were beautiful individuals who were vessels of true divine light and love. And I can remember being a very frightened child, and when I would go to visit them, before they would return me home, each of my papaws would pull me aside and say, "Now, Papa wants to tell you something. Mama and Papa love you, but more importantly, God loves you. And He has a unique and special purpose to achieve with your life. No matter how bad it gets, no matter how scared you feel, don't you ever lose faith in that knowledge. You keep your eyes on the reality, on knowing that God loves you and He's going to take care of you." Dr. Rahm, if I hadn't had that message given to me repeatedly from the time I could first understand the English language through those very difficult early childhood years, if I were alive at all, there is no question but that I would be living in a dark hole somewhere, wondering what someone who has held jobs like I've held was going to do to come find me and pull me out. I had come up in a blue-collar family where the metrics for success were you be a doctor or a lawyer, and so you're going to get ahead. I had a very idealized version of American history and civics education delivered by beautiful grade school and middle school teachers who either started teaching during World War II or were trained by that World War II Greatest Generation cohort. They gave me a fabulous education. What I was not prepared for was the discrepancy between the version of America that I was taught and the version of America that I encountered, beginning with law school and everything that followed in a legal career that involved 16 years of litigation practice across Kentucky, representing Walmart, Tennessee Valley Authority, and Tyson Foods exclusively within years that coincided with the onset and explosion of the opioid epidemic out of central and southern Appalachia, out across the rest of the country. This evolved into just a happenstance scenario whereby I was recruited out of the blue to run Kentucky's Social Security disability system. Within that job, we did a 35-year retrospective study on the impact of that system within the state, and I'm just going to give you a couple of examples of something that we found. Between 1980 and 2015, Kentucky's population grew 20%. Enrollment in the Social Security disability program grew 249%. Childhood enrollment grew 449%. Enrollment growth was paired with the explosion of the issuance of opioid medications to an adult SSI Medicaid population that was primarily receiving that benefit for asserted mental health conditions, not physical. I also saw within the same data an explosion of the issuance of habituating psychotropic medications to children within the Social Security disability Medicaid system. And I mean, we looked at per capita prescription rates, with children receiving in 2001 over 450 doses per child of habituating psychotropic medications within the SSI Medicaid system. By 2015, that had reached a level of almost 700 doses per SSI Medicaid child. I went in then to run the Attorney General's Office of Medicaid Fraud and Abuse Control, which was a law enforcement office that investigated and prosecuted physicians and other providers for fraud on that system, as well as for the abuse, neglect, or exploitation of Medicaid beneficiaries. When I came into that job, I found a caseload that had a significant number of medically assisted treatment clinics that treat opioid addiction and that issue prescriptions for methadone and Suboxone under intensive investigation for essentially being licensed and credentialed white-collar drug dealing operations, fomenting as much Suboxone diversion within their communities as they could. When Kentucky achieved settlements with opioid distributors and manufacturers through a multi-state litigation process, the legislature set up a commission to administer that money. Now, I love my people at home, and unfortunately, their governance is well beneath their dignity. And Kentucky has competed with Louisiana for bottom of the basement when it comes to corruption within public governance systems. So when the commission came to be, I was recruited to run it, and I said, this is a very treacherous opportunity. There are certain power centers within this state that are accustomed to getting whatever they want, however much they want, at any whimsy. The only way I'm going to do this job is if it can be done with accessibility to average citizens, with transparency to the people who live here, and with accountability for the results we produce. I said, go for it. And I had watched the ineffective nature relative to need of our existing addiction treatment systems. Those systems are either straight up abstinence only, which well-intentioned, but produce about a 7% long-term success rate. Our other model is the use of opioids with which to treat opioids, named medically assisted treatment or medication for opioid use disorder. I analogize that to taking somebody who's had an alcohol problem with a bottle of wild turkey every day and giving them a 6-pack of beer instead. Yeah. It's going to be a slower burn, make them more functional, but you're still substance dependent. I came to Ibogaine because in 2018, I started following developments around the discovery that psilocybin had a dramatic impact on alcoholism, and I come from a family that has been generationally devastated by alcohol. I came across a lady who wrote beautifully about her experiences with psilocybin, and I said, hey, what can you tell me about the world of plant medicine and whether there's anything that has application to opioid addiction? We have got to turn the tide here in Kentucky, and what we're doing ain't good enough. She said, have you ever heard of Ibogaine? And I said, I had not. So on July 29, 2022, I went on an 8-month intensive critical examination due diligence exercise that was a second full-time job to determine what this was, what it could do, and what impact it would have. That's the long story stated as abbreviatedly as I can.
That's an
to how I came
amazing
to it.
story. I worked in a methadone clinic.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, I used to work in Mobile Mental Health Center. I was a psychologist before I was a scientist, and we had women that were pregnant that were addicts, and they would give them methadone. The problem would be they would go out on the street and then do drugs, and I felt like we were drugging. I was a psychologist, so I was trying to help them work through the issues. I felt like it wasn't a solution. I felt like it was a Band-Aid, and no one was getting better. And I understand what you're saying. It's like the slow burn, right? But they're still getting that drug, right? And so I had a big problem, and then I was asked to work in Suboxone when all that came out, because I used to be in the pharmaceutical industry. I had such an issue with that, with the things that were happening. And on the flip side, I was part of a study where we were using THC with brain damage when I was in the pharmaceutical industry, and we had great results, right, with these children. So it was so confusing to me what the government was approving and what they weren't approving, where the money was going and where it wasn't going. So when people came to me and started talking to me about what you were doing, I was fascinated, with the amount of CTE, with the amount of depression and anxiety. And I say this constantly, and it's a privilege to meet you, because I say all the time, we have some products en route that are for helping people with addiction as well, but you bringing this to the forefront, and you've got an audience, so people are listening to you because of your background and who you are and your integrity. And we have to have that in our system.
You'll make me cry.
No, it's so true. It's a broken system, and I've been so devastated to this day. I still think of the people that I treated as a psychologist and the pain, and there was no way for me to really help them. Of course, I listened, I prayed. Part of what I did was not about, going into community mental health. It wasn't about God, but for me it was. Like by the way, my dad's family's from Kentucky. I shared this with your wife. I know about the corruption. I know about the drugs. I know about the Appalachian and what's happened, and it's just a tragedy,
Yes, it
right?
is.
It's like one of the places in the world that has the best music and some of the most talented people, the creators, and yet this drug and alcohol addiction and this pain and anxiety is destroying families generation after generation. So tell me, you had this journey, and by the way, your life is it's just phenomenal. And here's what I have to say: it only God could have put, in my opinion, the Creator could have made that life. I say it about my own life. When people ask me, how did I get here? I'm like, I didn't. Like, this happened. Like, someone did this for me. I mean, I've worked really hard, but my heart has been to help people. You're doing that. And I read the article about the 30 people that had PTSD that were in our armed forces and had gone through extreme measures, and what you did to help them. And I was actually blown away, understanding the pain, but yet the intelligence of the people. And when I say intelligence, I mean their ability to understand they weren't normal anymore, right? They had the ability to understand something's wrong, do anything to help fix me, right? And one of the issues is, if you're a person if you haven't gone through extreme PTSD, even like you did as a child, right? And I would say I have gone through some things. I've been kidnapped. I've been in wars. So I've seen things that were very traumatic to me that I would say most women have not. I've worked in 92 countries, so I've been around a lot of good things, and I'll be honest, a lot of bad things as well. It was eye-opening to me as well about the government. Not that I don't love our government, it just understanding the reality of what was going on and how many things need to be fixed, and that's a mission. But it starts with each person. And here's the thing. If that person and that family, that father or that mother has gone through extreme stress and they can't deal, like they only can deal with the tools they have, right? So if they are distraught and in pain and experiencing just horrifying dreams and not being able to live and function appropriately, that impacts a whole family unit that then impacts our whole world, because it's a ripple effect. Our DNA is shared in this room. Everybody in this room. God made us to talk ourselves, right? So you've gone in And you've basically made an advancement that no one's been able to make in hundreds of years. And I mean hundreds of years in our world. I know this because I've been, as a psychologist, I haven't seen any changes. Like, where are the changes? So this is something we have to get out to the world, not just to the United States, but everywhere. Our company's in 87 countries, and I want everyone to hear about you. So I want you to tell them about Ibogaine and what it does, and scientifically why this advancement is making major changes to people that are suffering in our world.
When I first came into knowledge of Ibogaine, I did so within the context of its impact on opioid-dependent individuals. And I learned that the observational field data that has been generated over what has been decades now has been generated as a result of treatments delivered to individuals who were terminally opioid dependent. These folks had tried everything there was to try multiple times. Their next stop was the graveyard. And in order to give themselves one last chance, they jumped off into the wild blue yonder, traveled outside the United States into Mexico to go and find this exotically named West African psychoactive alkaloid called Ibogaine.
Can I tell our audience, because I want them to know this, and you can explain it better than I can. Once you have this opioid addiction and your neurotransmitters and your nerve and everything, even if you look at the pulmonary effect on the body and the heart, the brain, even the microbiome, right? Once you get addicted, it's really hard. Like, people make a judgment about that, but I just want the audience to understand, once you reach that point, and a lot of times it wasn't on purpose, right?
Yes.
They went through pain, or the government gave them this drug, or someone that was a friend, and then they are so addicted. I would love for you to explain that, because I think there's so many people that are judgmental about the fact that people are addicted. I don't think that a lot of people really understand what these individuals have gone through. Can you just spend a second on that? Because one of the big things in my life has been, when I try to talk about plant therapies, just the comments that I get. Like, I really would like our audience and people to understand what that means when you're an opioid addict and why it's so hard to quit.
For the longest time, I, like most people, believed that opioid addiction was the result of moral failure, and that if an individual could just be preached at, screamed at, condemned at, and jailed at enough, they'd come out of it. Mm-hmm. In preparation for the job that I had to do for the state of Kentucky, I had to make sure that I was fully educated on biology and chemistry. And what I came to learn was that my position was rooted in profound ignorance of reality.
That's what I learned, because I used to be I was, even as a psychologist, and as a psychologist, you can't judge anyone. But deep down, I was like you in the beginning. I couldn't understand. And then I had to scientifically really learn about it, because I had this judgment, which was not good, because you're not supposed to judge anyone. But I couldn't help. So I'm glad you said that. You even felt that way at one point.
Yes, ma'am. And if we're going to assign condemnation for moral failure, let's go back to the beginning. Yeah. When OxyContin was detonated in the mountains of Appalachia in the fall of 1996, a medication that was explicitly engineered to be as addictive as possible. Folks with fancy degrees from institutions that are not to be sassed created a compound that had as its end consequence, knowingly, the habituation of the human brain to its effects. And when we talk about opioid dependency, we're talking about a neurochemical brain injury, where once an individual comes into contact with the opioid and uses it with any degree of longevity, their brain cannot produce on its own our survival chemicals, which are dopamine and serotonin. Right. They are the chemicals that drive all of our most base human instincts: eat, drink, fight, flight, procreate. All are dopamine and serotonin behaviors. When an individual is deprived of opioids, when they engage in behavior that looks as though it is depraved criminality, what we are actually seeing is the symptomological display of the neurochemical brain injury that results from dopamine and serotonin shutdown. A person has to be completely abstinent from all opioid consumption for at least 18 months before the brain will begin to produce its own dopamine and serotonin, and to reflect on the addictive nature of the opioid in response to the most pleasurable physical stimuli that the human body can experience. The brain at its maximum has a dopamine response of 125 nanograms per deciliter. Opioids produce a dopamine response of 975 nanograms per deciliter, almost a factor of 10 beyond what the brain can produce on its own. The reason abstinence programs have a 7% success rate, and the reason the best medically assisted treatment model has a 25% success rate, is because what we have does not in any way resolve the core neurochemical brain injury that is caused by the dopamine and serotonin shutdown of opioid exposure. A single Ibogaine treatment will restore the brain to its pre-opioid exposure condition within 48 hours and completely resolve physiological opioid dependence for 80% of people who take it once. That number goes up to 97% with a second booster dose if craving is still there after the initial flood dose.
That is such a blessing. I have to say, I know you don't know my life, but I've had family members addicted to opioids, and when you're close to someone and they're addicted, it's hard, right? Because the actions don't reflect who the person is.
That's
because
right.
when you don't have dopamine and serotonin, you're not experiencing joy. You can't think straight.
Misery.
You're miserable. And so how do you function in a home, right, with that misery? And I just want to stop for a second and make sure that's why the audience understands we shouldn't judge people, because we don't always understand what's happening. But I have to say this, for you to have this solution, for you to have been led to this solution and to be the warrior that's carrying the torch on this is going to save so many people's lives.
I pray you're right. That is the aspiration, without question.
Well, it's going to. You already are. Like, you've made such a difference. I was at a meeting in New York for a fashion show, which has nothing to do with this. We were raising money for animals. And I came in contact with a gentleman that actually went to your program, and he was in Special Forces and Delta 9, and a couple of different teams. He saw horrible things, and it just changed his life forever. I mean, he's a father. So when you change a father's life, you're changing our world, because you're changing the generation and then the next generation, and we don't have another answer to opioid addiction, in my opinion, in this country. 7% doesn't cut it, or any country. Let me just say that. 25% doesn't cut it, and I know the programs that you're talking about. It is a travesty. When I started dealing with plant medicine on the natural side, because I'd worked on the pharmaceutical side, I really wanted to work with addiction as well, because there wasn't a solution. So I did come up with different products. If you think of, as a scientist, it's kind of like you in your life. I wanted to create solutions because of things I had gone through, right? You wanted to create solutions. In my opinion, God, first of all, thank goodness for your grandfathers and your grandmother.
Every day.
I had equally these wonderful people. I just have to share with you that if I didn't have God in my life, and I wasn't told that as a young child, I would never be where I am. It was something I've held on to my whole life, and it's easy to look at a person and not really know what they've gone through. None of us really do. But you sharing this story and then sharing how much work you actually have done in your life. Like, I'm listening to your positions and what you've done that led you here. And now you are offering a solution to our world that no one else has been able to offer. This is something that, and your gentleness, I just want to say this, I met your amazing wife. She has the same honestly gentleness and kindness, but your strength in bringing this to the front without any arrogance, without any sense of entitlement, is so refreshing to me. And it's I think because of this, because of not just the knowledge, but your personality and your humbleness, you will change the way addiction is treated in this world.
You know, you're supplying me with a whole lot of bulletin board material to keep me motivated, because every affirmation you have offered are words for me to live up to. I live with me every day, and I'm very intimately acquainted with my own deficiencies. So I appreciate you giving me the kindness that you are here this morning.
Well, I'm being sincere.
I
I'm
believe
being
you.
really sincere.
Thank you.
Words are words, but if you mean them, they carry blessings, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a hard journey. I'm just going to tell the audience. I just know the pressure, because me, as a scientist, I've worked with so many incredible leaders scientifically all over the world, but it's hard to get through to me, to be honest, because I've done so much research in science. Your explanations, your understanding of dopamine and serotonin alone and the neurotransmitters, because your neurotransmitters, again, impact your microbiome, your heart, in your brain, your entire life. So when you say those people's last option was the grave, that's the truth.
Yep.
When you don't have hope because you can't be happy and you feel like you're failing everyone in your life, you give up on yourself. And if you don't have a solution, what do? So anyone that is criticizing, in my opinion, and believe me, I did not expect to say this when I walked in here, anyone that is criticizing what you're doing, they're not looking into what you're doing to help people. Because a majority of the treatments, people don't realize this, like your methadone, your Suboxone, and again, I'm not talking bad about companies or what they're doing, but I am saying that these things will kill people, right? So having something that will actually impact the serotonin and dopamine and restore it, because I've always looked at it like the battery's out, right? Mm-hmm. And the problem is the connectors aren't working and that battery can't fill up. And that's how I've explained it to people. When people have an opioid addiction, there's no connection, right? They're not. If you say to them, why aren't you happy? They can't be happy because the body's not producing serotonin and dopamine, and then they feel guilty about something they can't control, right?
That's right.
And then the guilt and the judgment and the pain that goes along with that sometimes makes people end their life. So I want every parent to hear this as well. We have a crisis in our country.
Yes, we do.
We have a major crisis in our country, and we have crises all over, but really the United States has got to do something. So my question is, this is happening in Mexico. What about the United States?
Well, following what appeared to be an absolute death experience of the Ibogaine initiative that I was leading in Kentucky, I had a very wise friend of mine say, sometimes God has to set you back to move you up a little bit. And when the Kentucky project ended, and that project for your audience's purposes was aimed at taking $42 million or 5% of the state settlement funds from the opioid manufacturers and creating a public-private partnership to essentially get Ibogaine through the FDA as an approved breakthrough medication for opioid addiction that can be integrated into the U.S. healthcare system. As we sit here right now on March the 14th, one day shy of the Ides of March, I am pleased to report that the Arizona House, with the leadership of former U.S. Senator Kirsten Sinema, has passed the first state appropriation to the tune of $5 million to create Ibogaine research and development around TBI, traumatic brain injury, post-traumatic stress, and addiction. It is anticipated that the Senate will pass that bill there and that it will be signed into law. Arizona will be the first. Right now in Texas, there is House Bill 3717 that is being championed by Representative Cody Harris, and that is the bill that would see Texas finish the job that was begun in Kentucky. And I've had the great blessing of being able to work with former Texas Governor Rick Perry on this project. Everything is going very well. So if you've got audience members in Texas, contact your representatives and state senators and express your support for the Texas Ibogaine initiative. I anticipate that there will be legislation to do similar things filed in the state of West Virginia come Tuesday of next week, thanks to the efforts of a state representative by the name of Ryan Browning. And then I am here in Tennessee today to have an opportunity to speak with the heads of the public health systems, substance use and mental health system, and the head of the Tennessee Opioid Fund to see if we can't recreate a little history and get Tennessee joined up with Texas to make some major advancements for human freedom and dignity across this country.
That's amazing. I was supposed to have actually a dinner. Well, I don't know if I'm supposed to even bring this up, so I'll change that conversation.
It's okay.
I would love to introduce you to also some people in South Carolina. Have you approached South Carolina?
Just before I came in here, I had the opportunity to speak with a South Carolina state senator who would love to explore South Carolina's ability to engage this discussion.
I'd love to introduce you to Sherry Biggs. She's a very good friend of mine in Congress, and is handling some of this, and she's on the committees. So I'd love to introduce you, and then I'd love to invite your wife. We have a meeting in May. Not that I don't want to invite you. You're welcome to come, but we have most of the major individuals in the state. I have a very close friend named Karen Floyd. Pamela Evett is the lieutenant governor of the state, very close friend, and the whole government there. I actually am in manufacturing and research and development with the state, and I would love to introduce you to some of those key individuals because they are really trying to make advancements in this area as well. And I think just meeting those individuals, and I do know the deadlines and different things that come up as far as initiatives, but this would be something wonderful. And because they've given me an R&D platform in a basically 100,000 square feet space, this would be an awesome opportunity for you to hopefully bring some things into the state of South Carolina as well.
Thank you for opening up the opportunity to do that, and I'd be glad to take you up on it. And as for my wife,
I would
I'm
love
happy
for her
to
to
be
speak.
her.
You're her arm candy. I'm sorry.
You're mighty kind.
Well, Alice, you're like, Joe Alice is like, no, because it's a women's empowerment, but the men in the state are sponsoring it, and there's this wonderful magazine named Elysium, and they carry different initiatives throughout the United States. But there's a panel on health that they're doing for the state. They're bringing in people from all over the world, major individuals, and there are panels that women are on. And if she could speak on this as a health initiative, it would get the word out, not just through the United States, but throughout international. So it would be a great opportunity. Every news station, every major hitter would be there. I would love to have you on the panel, but you are not a female.
Listen, she and I, you may have heard this in other contexts, when I started down the road to champion Ibogaine, I was a firm believer that I needed to be willing to practice what I was preaching.
Yeah.
And given all of the scaremongering that was around it, I said, I need to man up and do what I had recommended others do. So she and I traveled to Mexico at the end of November of 23 so that we could receive it and understand what it was about. And Jo Alice has had nothing short of her own miraculous outcome as a result of a single treatment that saw the resolution of what had been a years-long struggle with a psychotic mood disorder that was rooted in some profound postpartum depression she experienced in 2001. She had been on Celexa, which is an SSRI, steadily since that time, and her last Celexa was taken on November 23rd of 2023. And if someone had told me that that would be the outcome, I would never have believed it possible.
I'm so happy for you. I was at Pfizer when we had Zoloft. I worked on different SSRIs.
You know the beast, don't you?
I worked at Pfizer and J&J and all that. Here's the issue with the SSRIs. They become addictive, and then people can't get off of them. And I understand that maybe some people think it's the only solution. And in some instances, and I always say this, I'm not here to judge that because some people need an immediate, and they can't just get to the Ibogaine. They can't just get there. So I think that, but having a solution for women,
yes, ma'am,
that need, like, women raise children. Women are our nurturers. Like, we are here to take care. And I say this, I'm a female. I believe men are here to take care of women. I'm just going to say this.
Well,
we're supposed to take care of men, too. So I don't mean that negatively, but you doing that is amazing. Like, being able to be that example, it really is, because some people are too scared to do something that's out of the ordinary, and they're not willing to try to be the example. So it is huge. It's not something everyone would do. People get so caught up in what, please forgive me for saying this, in following everything instead of being a leader and finding a change in life. And I have to say, my husband had asked me to go and like to the clinic and see the clinic. And I was like, let me do this interview first, because I was doubtful, and I'm a scientist. But I can tell you everything you have told me is 100% accurate scientifically. And that's a lot for me to say that, because I've studied science my whole life. And as far as neurotransmitters, that's been one of my major focuses. We produced different things to help. I, as a scientist, have made things to help clean out the system. But those things cleaning out the system don't stop completely all the depression. If there could be a way to utilize the products that we've made to increase serotonin and dopamine along with this would be fantastic. I had worked some on the Adderall and different products like that, as well as SSRIs, and the problem is, again, the side effects and what it's doing to our youth and to our people. And I got to tell you, doctors and scientists are scared to speak up about it because we're criticized if we do. But the truth is, we should really be here for humanity.
That's right.
And not just for money.
You mentioned the dynamics within broader American society, and whether it was the taking of depositions of individuals who had come to the end of hope as a result of their work accidents that found the misapplication of treatment by way of high-powered opioid dosages that they should never have received, or whether it was the thousands of Kentuckians I heard from as we conducted 20 town halls across the state in preparation for the Commission's work. I very much believe that at the heart of trauma and addiction is profound spiritual affliction. If we are not responsive to that reality, we are doomed to failure. And to kind of bring this full circle, we talked about the physiology of Ibogaine. What is as consequential among those who have received it for their addiction issues is the psychology of Ibogaine, where on the other side of the experience, the individual will say, for most of my life, I thought I was the prisoner of my compulsions, that I was defective, that I had a disease that I could never overcome. I now know that I have ownership of myself and my future, and that future will be determined on the basis of my choices rather than my compulsions. And then finally, I would say, and this to me is the most significant and consequential aspect of the Ibogaine experience. Certainly this was the case for myself and my wife, and it is for most others. Within the context of the introspective journey a person will take, and the beauty is, unlike the other psychedelics, Ibogaine is not dissociative.
Right.
When you are in it,
right.
You are constantly aware of person, place, and time.
Which is very different. I want the audience to hear that, because one of the problems I have with some of the alternatives to this is you're not in a lot of the other situations.
That's correct.
And I'm not trying to judge that either. I'm just saying you're not. And that's the fear for me as a scientist and as a doctor. You when you lose that consciousness, right? It's different. To be able to know what's happening while you're in the experience is, to me, is an extreme difference scientifically.
Yes, ma'am.
On how psychologically, mentally, emotionally the person will adapt to the experience.
That is absolutely correct. Ibogaine is not a dissociative. It preserves the individual's free will to engage it as they wish. And for those who wish to engage it introspectively, they come away not with a belief, not with a suspicion, not with an idea, but a concrete affirmation of their identity as a spiritual being who is made in the image of an eternal creator whose essence is pure and unconditional love, who also has a special and unique purpose for their life. Whether we're talking about individuals who have gone through modern American pharmacology systems for their conditions, pharmacology that anesthetizes the soul and slowly euthanizes the body, or whether we're talking about a generation of Americans who have never had any experience recognizing the existence of their soul, to provide the additional option and the choice to give an individual the curative experience of Ibogaine for mind, body, and soul is the least that we can do in response to what has been the catastrophic failure of American governance systems as a result of profound, corrupt incompetencies that have caused massive damage since 1996. The least we can do is offer an alternative.
Absolutely, because we are now disassociated as people.
That's right.
We are disassociated. Our mental, emotional, especially our spiritual beings are not connected. And it's a epidemic, pandemic, like it's worse than anything in my opinion. When everything happened with COVID and everything else, I was more worried about the mental instability and the trauma that would happen with people, because I understood how viruses, bacteria, fungus, Lyme disease, let me go on, how it impacts the neurotransmitters and the spiritual connection that we have. And for some reason, individuals in this world have been disassociated and we've allowed it, right? So you've got to give people back why they're here. And I say this all the time, we're each connected to each other. We're connected to a leaf on a tree. So when there's a war in Ukraine and Russia, all of us are connected. Spiritually, we were put on this earth to be here for each other and to live this mission. When you take that away because a government or people or an industry have made people addicts and zombies, that's a problem. And I say that word zombie, I really mean that. When you watch a movie where you see what happens in these, my kids watch these crazy like zombie movies, these people are disassociated, right? Yeah. Well, we need to understand that people here on this earth are disassociated too, and there hasn't been a lot that we've done about it. In fact, we've allowed it. So to have a solution that can help people with CTE, with brain injuries, like these athletes that have had so much addiction because they've been put back on a field to play a sport, then they have their whole lives impacted. And there's nothing anyone's really done about it. So this ability to help those people is something so significant. So I would hope that the NBA and the NFL and all of your professional teams are involved or understanding how this could potentially help the players as well.
I'm glad you mentioned CTE and professional athletes. Within the past month, there is a very brave gentleman who has come forward with his own individual recovery story. His name is Robert Gallery. He is a former lineman for the Oakland Raiders, a 9-year NFL veteran. When he stopped playing after having experienced multiple concussions and went into retirement, he started to recognize that he was experiencing very dangerous mood and behavioral tendencies for himself as well as those that he loved. And after struggling with this, trying to self-medicate, as we will often do to kill pain,
right,
he, as a last resort to save himself and his family, in April of 21 went for an Ibogaine treatment for what were, without question, through MRI images, symptoms of significant CTE. Mr. Gallery received Ibogaine treatment in April of 21, and he has been essentially symptom-free ever since, which goes to the last point I would make about Ibogaine, just from a physiology perspective. What we are coming to know and to understand is that there's nothing known to modern science that regenerates the brain, regenerates brain tissue. When it's gone, it's gone. Ibogaine is demonstrating the ability to create neurotrophic growth factors that literally eliminate traumatic brain injury, restore a brain that has been impacted by CTE, and it shows promise of delivering significant therapeutic relief to individuals who are currently receiving Ibogaine treatment to keep symptoms of Parkinson's, multiple sclerosis, and Lyme disease in almost full remission. Dr. Nolan Williams out of Stanford University led the study of 30 veterans that was published in Nature Medicine on January 5th of last year. He has said, and I agree, that Ibogaine is the most sophisticated medication on the planet, and I'm very much persuaded that it is divinely engineered to provide human beings with the divine restoration that no human hand can ever generate in a factory.
Oh, absolutely. That was great. That was wonderful what you say, because I have our audience, because I work with natural plant-based medicine and used to be in the pharmaceutical industry, but people will say to me, how can a plant, how can these different solutions really impact people's lives when they're not a pharmaceutical, I get very frustrated. I'm like, wait a minute, our Creator made these things in our earth to really help us. And now having a much better understanding of what you're doing and what the wonderful doctors that are treating these people are doing, it's amazing. So my next question is, and I think she's telling me I have to go, but I really want to know this, are the grants that you're getting, are you and the assistants in this area, are you submitting for Parkinson's and ALS and CTE, or is it just the first round? Will it just be for people with PTSD and depression and anxiety and pain?
The main driver for the development of Ibogaine right now is as a breakthrough therapeutic for opioid use disorder and co-occurring substance use disorder. However, within, in particular, the Texas legislation, there is language that would enable the state to fund clinical trials around other mental health or neurological conditions for which it demonstrates efficacy within the trials for opioid use disorder and co-occurring substance use disorder. We know that people who are opioid dependent are often dependent on other substances. They also bring a host of mental health issues to the table. We're going to get real-time, real-life results across multiple diagnostic conditions as these trials play out, and that will supply the body of scientific knowledge that is necessary to expand these trials. And this is what makes the involvements of other states so critically important. Ibogaine is not patentable, so when people say, why are we using state money to do this, it is to incentivize its development within an alkaloid that cannot be patented for exclusive use with high paywalls and high access that would be created by a pharmaceutical company. You have to have that state incentive. The more states we have involved, the more opportunity there is to develop Ibogaine for other clinical indications such as Parkinson's and Lyme and multiple sclerosis. It begins with opioid addiction because that probably is the most consequential public health issue that we face broadly. We have got to get a handle on it so that we can make some generational progress. But that's just the beginning, and what's going to be a much longer and beautiful process of multiple diagnostic applications as we move forward.
That's fantastic. That's amazing. And so I understand now. So the more states and the more involvement that you can get in this project, the faster it will help.
Yes, ma'am.
People.
It is the true Manhattan Project opportunity of our age.
Yeah.
If we can have multiple states devote multiple revenue streams to platform this thing across the United States, we will significantly accelerate the day in which we can integrate this into the healthcare system for multiple clinical indications for which we have no current effective treatments.
That's amazing. Another individual I'm going to introduce you guys to is Eric Pike. I told your wife because he's on, there's two individuals on the board of the federal government that are working with hemp and CBD and agricultural and natural solutions, basically. And so he happens to be one of our close friends. And I always say, I don't know how Eric got in that position. Like, he's one of the funniest people in the world. You would love him. But I just think as many connections as I can help you guys with, I would love to. I'm sure you have a lot of your own. But anything you need, please let me know.
I am always happy to offer servant hands to other servants from whichever direction they come. And thank you.
Well, I'm a servant, so if I can serve you all in any way, I would love to, and I mean that.
Thank
I really
you, ma'am.
do. You're going to make me cry, and I'm not going to cry on this podcast. I think there's a lot of things that there's people that God brings together, and I think that you are at such a pivotal point to save through a creator that's much higher than us. I don't believe we're instruments, right? And so you're an instrument that will help so many people, and I just want to say thank you.
Well, it is a joy and a privilege to be aligned with you and individuals who see the world as you do, particularly with the recognition of the spiritual experience of humanity.
Thank you for saying that.
And I will leave you with this, and I'm going to reach over and shake your hand and tell you how much I look forward to being able to walk together with you to bring good tidings unto the meek, to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty to the captives, and the opening of the prison to them that are bound. That is our mission on this side of eternity, and I am happy to walk it with you, ma'am. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much. I will walk it with you. Maybe I'll be following because you're the one that's making these advancements. Thank you so much. And for me as a scientist, I really am hard to accept changes and things that are different because I've seen so much, and this is definitely something that will change our world.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you so much. And I, again, am blessed to have met you and your beautiful wife, so thank you.
It's a joy and a privilege.
She's going to be center stage, hopefully.
I can't wait.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am.